Welcome to the My Personal Football Coach Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast, episode 23 with Miguel Rios.
Welcome to MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson-Hurst.
Hi guys, Saul here, back again with another show. This episode we've got a great guest, one of the best youth development recruiters around, one of the top scouts in football, who started off in youth football and now works in first team football. It's Miguel Rios, who's a real bit of a living legend in the London recruitment scene in terms of academy football, one of the top scouts around, who really did know how to get them players through the door, and really honoured that he agreed to come on the show and share his journey. He started off his career, he worked at Barcelona as a coach, but before going into working in recruitment, working at Arsenal, then Brentford, and then in the academies, and then moving into first team football with Fulham, and now at Wolverhampton Wanderers, where he's first team scout, European scout. So really privileged. He's got a lot of fantastic knowledge to share. This guy is one of the best around. Really respect him. Respect his ideas. He also knows a lot about coaching as well, because he's got a coaching background. So really has been there and done that. And one of the best around. So if you're interested in recruitment and scouting, I'm sure you're going to love this show. It's really enjoyable, really privileged to spend an hour or so in his time. So I know you're going to enjoy this one. Just busy as always, trying to develop the app. If you don't know, My Personal Football Coach is an app, is a technical coaching app designed to support players who want to work away from team sessions. So it's like a homework app. So you can download it from Apple or Google. Once you go to My Personal Football Coach and sign up, then download the app. And it's designed really as a course. So there's a course there with 30, 20-minute sessions. The idea it's supposed to supplement your team training, not replace it. So really important. And there's lots of bonuses on there. Bonus ball mastery practices, some tips for myself, the coach. So really going well, the app now. It's really going strong, and lots of people all around the world use it. Players of all levels, pro players, academy players, amateur players. Wolverhampton Wanderers use it in their academy for their foundation phase of the homework program. We've got federations using it, and we've got local clubs all around the world. Also now we've been doing the club partnerships for a long time now. We're doing team partnerships as well. So sometimes clubs don't want to sign up to it, but if you've got a team of players, a squad of players, and you want to support their technical development in a consistent quality way, we're now doing team partnerships, so you can sign up and get your whole team on the app with a discounted rate, with the bespoke app as well, with your team logo on there. So if you're a team manager and you're interested in want to find quality ways to get your players to work away from training, maybe you only got them once or twice a week, this is the only online technical app proven at the very highest level and used at the highest level as well. So just drop me an email and we can discuss more. But without further ado, let's get into the show. So Miguel Rios, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on here.
Can you just give us a little brief background about your playing and coaching or scouting experience up to this point?
Okay. I started off as a coach, working basically local football, working in semi-pro leagues as a coach. Started coaching in schools while I worked. I used to work in the city. So
what did you do in the city?
Worked on the front office in credit derivatives on the trading floor, building trading models, designing trading models, and supporting the project and the business analysis of implementing those business models into the IT infrastructure at the bank, in banks basically. So I worked as a contractor, worked for myself, which allowed me to take time off to coach, do my badges as well.
Okay, and then tell us about your How did you start in football?
So started off in football. I basically coaching in schools. I ended up coaching in a Spanish school, which is in London. I was coaching football there. One of the teachers there, she lived in Barcelona and she was doing a study year in English in the school. Her boyfriend at the time, husband now, was one of the Barcelona coaches. So basically he came in, saw what I was doing in my sessions and invited me over to attend sessions, to watch sessions, and that turned out for me that I ended up doing work for basically Barcelona soccer schools out in Barcelona, which is the level below, the layer below the actual academy. So players will go in there on trial, filtered out to progress into the academy. So that allowed me to take up and take in a lot of information, what's done, how it's done, why it's done at their academy. So I just filled myself with sessions, speaking to people, knowing people, friends now who are coaches all over the world, and still even there that you leverage information, you get ideas from, and just have discussions about football and coaching.
And so what was your next, after Barcelona soccer schools?
I ended up working at the academy in Arsenal, started doing their pre-academy foundation recruitment in West London, ended up doing running a development centre for them for about 4 years there in West London, looking after all of that, and ended up while I was doing my coaching, coached at sessions, did everything there, came to a point, did my B licence, and within a month of doing it, it wasn't something I really wanted to do, coaching anymore. So I just got onto the recruitment side.
And then after Arsenal, we'll go through briefly your career and then we'll go delve deeper.
So after Arsenal, went to Brentford, a new project that was set up there. Spent 6 years there in the academy, ended up there working through to become academy head of recruitment and then working in the first team recruitment as well there. Following that, moved over to Fulham to work in the first team recruitment as a first team scout in Europe, and spent 2 seasons there and just recently joined Wolves this season after leaving Fulham as European scout.
Okay, so let's just flip back then, talk about that experience at Barcelona, obviously, a famous academy. What was that like going in there, looking at those sessions and thinking about now your experience? What did you notice about that? What was anything unique about that?
The culture, and I'm not the environment, but the culture. The environment is the environment, and they set that anyway. But the culture of teaching, of not coaching, but more on the teaching aspect, especially in the foundation phase.
So what do you mean about that specifically?
There's a lot more 1v1, one-on-one training. There is 1v1 training in specifics on players, but they get sidelined onto doing in the position-specific work, rather than just coach 1v1. So you'll get players, coaches will spend a lot more time individually with players, making sure they understand it, making sure. I mean, you look at a session now, and sometimes look at sessions, and I'm thinking, what's the purpose of the session? And when you're looking at these sessions, you're actually thinking that player has to actually understand or get the concept of what he's learning before that session finishes, or they move on to something else. Yeah. So, and then it's clever in the way they do it, and it doesn't hinder the group. So players will not progress onto the next level of the training. So the way it's structured is really clever. And especially foundation phases, there's no fail culture. So if you fail, there's nothing wrong with failing. It's just do it again right, until you succeed.
So thinking about that, I mean, obviously Miguel. So your background, where's your family from?
Spain.
Spain, so Spanish.
Yeah.
So that's obviously the language is no problem.
I
mean, then so tell us about your time at the soccer schools in terms of. Obviously, that's filtering down from the academy. What does that look like in terms of was there curriculum? I mean, it must have been a great learning experience for you in terms of. And then tell us what was the difference between what you learnt maybe in the English courses and what they were doing in Barcelona.
Compared to my time there, I learned less about sessions there. So I'll learn if I'm watching in England. I'm watching academy football, academy sessions. I'm learning. More about sessions and session structure, session planning, When I watch sessions there, I'm learning a lot more about coach delivery, about how sessions are set up. Cones, you don't need 100 cones, you don't need them in the right order. It's all set up properly in the sense of not random colours or anything like that, or random cones, but there's a structure. It's basically a lot of boxes, a lot of rectangles, and there's a purpose to that where you never see in session. I see a lot of boxes in sessions like 10v10s, 20, whatever it is, but what part of the foot pitch is square in that sense? So that their logic is let's do it in a circle, let's do it in a triangle, let's do it in a rectangle. So things like that, and then it makes you think, well, why are you doing that? So you're actually looking at the learning aspect, and it's maybe a subconscious way of players learning and finding angles and getting the right body shape to receive a pass. Because if you're doing it in a square, the body shape is simple, it's just in the angle of the corner. But if you're doing it in a triangle or a circle, you have to think a little bit more, and things like that will develop your awareness.
So did you do, I mean, that's a lot of rondo work, if you like, and possession work. So did you do a lot of that in your soccer school?
Yeah, so the session plans are all based around possession and ball management. So I wouldn't say ball mastery, but how you manage the ball and how you deal with the ball, because not all players will receive the ball and take lots of touches and dribble and beat 1v1, because they might end up being a centre half. So, and I'm careful with saying that because they don't really profile players that young. So they might end up being a centre half, but they do what they're good at, and have to be and deal with the ball well, manage the ball well. And when I say manage the ball well, it's not just the manipulation part, but I'd say the decision part as well. So when you receive the ball, what are you going to do with it? What's the purpose of the next pass? It might be a safe pass, or it might be a pass to break lines, but it's to move the ball. Ideally, it's to move the ball forward.
I mean, I've seen a lot of the Barcelona teams play, and I've heard a lot. It's very much about quick play, move the ball quickly. Is that at the foundation phase?
Yeah, exactly.
As well?
So it's not just move the ball quickly. It's sort of the management. What's sort of in the management. So it's make that decision quickly. So if you've made the decision before you've received the ball, you've made a quick decision. So it's things like that, and their identification of players is quite interesting, because it's looking at things a little bit like the Tottenham model kind of thing. Can players change decisions quickly? Can they receive and make a decision and change it while they're on the ball? So things like that are very important to them.
So I was going to ask about that, about the recruitment. So anything else you can tell us about the recruitment, obviously with your field?
The recruitment's quite clever. So, and it works for them because how the leagues are structured, they from under 8 will play, under 9 will play in leagues, and the coaches will every game the coaches will identify players of the opposition that might be of interest, and they'll just go into a list to be scouted. So the scouts will then go and identify players that way. Players identified have to be players that can deal the ball, can make a difference in games.
I think it's quite interesting as well, looking at the landscape there. Obviously your experience in London. I mean, obviously Barcelona, one of the biggest cities in Europe. They basically got carte blanche. They've got first pick.
Yeah, them and Espanyol, yeah.
I mean, Espanyol, but still, you know, pretty much Barcelona have got their first pick, right? So do you think that has a big impact? That gives them a big advantage, and that's why they've been successful, because they have got such the first pick, and that's such a big recruitment area.
I think that, and just the layer before that might be, is and with respect to the worst player in their group, is a good player.
Yeah.
So their difference between their best player and their worst player is very narrow. Really? So it's interesting you say that, because they will only bring players in if they improve the groups. Yeah. If not, they'll go into layer before, underneath, and if not, they'll go to Espanyol or whoever it is, because they can only really play for 2 or 3 teams in the area. So there is stories of players getting released and actually coming back into the system again.
Right.
And that's the way they feel. They feel if he's not ready at the moment, let him go and develop elsewhere.
I think it's quite interesting, because a lot similar to the French clubs as well. They have a huge base, hundreds of kids in different development centres. And we often talked about this. Remember, I was back at Tottenham. We'd like to do that, but it's so difficult because it's such a saturated market in England. You almost, we don't take him. Someone else has got to take him. So you almost,
I think, looking back on it now, I think that is a good way of doing it, in the sense of you have to recruit the model that your club works with and your coaching program works with. So that's what you need to recruit for. So within that, I always think, if that player doesn't suit your model, just let him go to another club. Now, and that's the thing, how competitive, it shouldn't really be that competitive, because you should only recruit players that suit your model And I think a lot of clubs now recruit players because they're good players, rather than that's the best player for my coaching model.
Right, okay. So then talk a little bit about then, how did you get the opportunity at Arsenal? How did that come about?
Basically, knew Roy Massey, and Roy invited me in, and ended up doing some coaching there, doing some recruitment there, and just got trust there. And I think that's the biggest thing in football to get on is the trust factor, that people actually trust you and know what you're going to do is going to be to a good level. Got to meet Sean O'Connor there, and since then been extremely close to him, to the way he works, learned a lot from him, and him and Roy were very good to my development.
Sean's come up before in this programme. He's like a bit of a legend in academy football. Tell us why is he so good? What did you learn off him?
His humbleness, his ability to share information, his ability to teach, and let you understand and let you manage yourself to develop yourself. So his experience is massive. I call sometimes we have conversations. I meet him for a coffee, and we just have conversations general about just recruitment, scouting players. So he's seen a lot of players go through the system, and just knowing that he's seen that type of player with those. With that ability, with those attributes, go to system where he's ended up, what he's needed. It's just his knowledge is excellent. He's excellent. So
then, tell us about those early days in scouting as a newbie scout in one of the biggest clubs in England. What was that like, and what did that look like day to day?
It was interesting. You basically, I started right at the bottom, so I ended up doing under 6, under 7s, under 8 pre-career academy, and it's quite a very competitive market, in the sense of people are very territorial. People take very personal. They own players, which no one owns any player. Clubs feel they own players. Clubs feel that's their player. And at the end of the day, the only people that own, and I'm saying that in that way, is parents. And they're the ones that need to make decisions on players, rather than coaches, academies, scouts, academies, grassroots coaches as well, not allowing players to go to certain academies, things like that. So you learn a lot. You learn a lot how to manage those situations, and just stick to the rules within that. If the player doesn't want to come to your club, that's it. Just go to another club, because the way I always looked at it was you have to recruit the right player to your club, and it has to be the right club.
What do you mean by right player? So what's on that certain type of player to fit the model? What do you mean?
So if we look at all the Champions League's academies, they've always got top players, and they'll always recruit the best players at those age groups. I've never felt looking at those groups, they're going to be the best players at 16, 18, 21, 14, because they're the best players then. They have, and I'm saying it loosely, but they'll have ceilings physically. They'll have ceilings technically and tactically in their learning. Sometimes they're not going to develop their learnings, and not going to let them develop, or the desired determination for whatever reason. I feel you just have to be a bit more selective at the younger age groups, and to get players that will last through your system as long as possible, because that's what you want to do. You don't want to bring a player in and get him at 8 or 7 and release him at 9 or 10. So I think your due diligence it has to be really good in your recruitment. So identify players you feel have got longevity in the system and have got the best chance to make it through.
So talking then about you're identifying 7, 8, 9-year-olds to get in the club. You don't want to release them. So what's the due diligence? How do you make a decision on a player that young? What goes into that?
You have to look at the personality. A lot of it is the social, psychological corner. What's their learning like? What's their desire to learn? What's their desire to want to play? Why they're here? And we've both seen players come through the system, and the players that come through the system are usually players that want to learn and want to improve, and the desire to improve. So you look at them. You're looking at technically how good they are, but then I look at some under 10s, under 12s, under 14s in the system at the moment who aren't always technically as good as they should be. So they still have time to learn as well. I know there's obviously the best years at foundation phase, but there's potentially players you can bring at younger age groups that you can develop technically, if they've got certain attributes, their learning attributes, physical attributes, whatever it is. One thing I always looked at with young players was their feet, how quickly they can move their feet. Doesn't matter if they're technically bad, but how quickly can they move their feet? How are they at their agility? Things like that for me are very important. I mean, I've never spoken about this really, but I've been to recruit players, and there's players in the system and players England's nationals in the youth sections that I recruited from an athletics and another one from gymnastics. So that's just looking at attributes, looking at what they could do with their body and things like that. It's just a different way to recruit, and it's marginal gains really. That's what you need to look at as working at Brentford, for example. That's what you have to look at. You have to look at marginal gains that other clubs won't be looking at, areas that other clubs won't be looking at.
I think it's interesting, from a coaching perspective, I always enjoyed working with, like you say, players who want to learn, but also clever players who had that football brain, that sort of thing. A lot of the time I felt there was a little bit too much emphasis on philosophy.
100%.
What do you think about that?
I mean, working it backwards, so if you look at a first team player at any club, there needs to be physical attributes. If you're looking at an under 6 and thinking he's going to have those physical attributes, I think it's a massive gamble. One, you don't know how they're going to physically end up. People will say, I look at their dad, I don't believe in things like that. And then you have to look at what the player's good at now, and you have to look at what he's going to bring to the group as well. So will he survive in that group kind of thing technically? So can he deal with the ball in that group? So if he doesn't, one, he's going to dilute your session that you've got. And if he can deal with the ball, but he's physically small, he's not really going to have a chance, because he's not going to get on the ball that often. So unless he's one that can get on the ball and can impact games when there are small sizes, it's a difficult one. You have to look at other stuff like the age bias stuff. You have to look at, can you play them down? So there's a lot of areas there you can do for players that haven't got the physical attributes yet, or may never have them, but they're still good players. There are things you can do there to work with them. And even sometimes you just let them go back into grassroots, let them develop there. Because if academy football's not going to help them develop them, go and play in the development centre, go and play back in grassroots.
Just because we're talking about the young players, what was your thoughts on that Michael Calvin documentary, Hunger in Paradise? There's a lot of talk about recruitment and going at young players.
I think it was very interesting to watch. When I look at that, it's a difficult programme to do because the book gives a better picture, but if you're trying to cram in whatever amount of information to an hour show, you're going to highlight things that you can highlight. So I think it's a little bit difficult to gauge on that. When you look at the book, it gives you a better picture. I do feel players recruit players at young ages just to recruit them, because they need 16 players in the under 9 group to play 2 6v6s or 2 7v7s, whatever they play, or 2 5v5s, whatever they're playing. So sometimes I feel they just recruit to recruit. So I agree with that part. The other side of it is I don't feel grassroots football gives enough to their development for them. So maybe an academy is a better place for them, even though they're not going to be a professional footballer. So it's the expectations is the important part there, which I don't think is addressed by many clubs. And that's the biggest part for me. So when I was working in academy football, I always said that, and I always told each player that I signed that he was going to get released. Every conversation, every player was going to get signed, he was going to get released at some point, be it in academy football, or he's going to be transferred if he made it professionally, because when a transfer's made, basically the player's basically released. So I mean the wording's a little bit clever there, but what I'm trying to say is their expectation in their mind, and when you're having that conversation as a parent, is you're going to be released. You do it in a positive way, because this is just a journey for you. Are you happy with that journey? Are you happy to commit to 3 times a week training, game on Sunday, whether it needs, maybe as you get older, change your lifestyle, how you treat your body, how you eat and things like that. Are you happy to commit to that type of lifestyle? And if they are, they're right, and most parents will do it, but you really have to explain it to them, and you still have to continue to educate them when they're going through the system.
It's quite interesting, because my reflection on that it was quite one-sided. I mean, and I think you make a good point there as well, is that you assume that grassroots football is this sort of utopia, when actually the quality they could get at an academy could actually be a good experience. But I think, like I say, it's about tempering expectations and educating the parents. What's your thought? I think now that I know Tottenham are actually showing that that documentary to parents as part of their recruitment process. What do you think about that?
I don't think it does any harm. I think parents need, and most parents I do know do have their feet on the ground. So I think as long as you're managing expectation, players will have ups and downs in academy football. They'll understand. They'll get to understand as they get older the issues that players have, and as friends of players and people, and parents will make friends during the journey. Their son's been released. They never see them again. Things like that. So it's a difficult time for parents. So I think, I'm not sure trying to shock parents is the right thing. I think trying to educate them is the key. So I prefer the education part. I do agree with. I don't think it's a bad thing showing that, but I think the education and continual education is something that's.
Okay, so I just want to go back a bit and go back to the Arsenal days, because that's the first experience. Obviously, when I was a coach at Tottenham, Arsenal were renowned for aggressive recruitment strategies, and names of Sean O'Connor and Miguel would strike fear into the hearts of into coaches and academy managers all around London. So tell us a little bit about the recruitment strategy at Arsenal at that time.
So when I worked with Sean, we knew every boy in London at those age groups that were potentially a player that could play in the academy. So we would work together, watching as many games, getting as many scouts to watch as many games, so that we knew every player of interest in London. I think all that is just doing your job. If you're a scout, you need to know all the best players that in your age groups, and who you also need to know them from under 6. And it's hard to say the players under 6 is going to be good enough for under 8, but at that moment in time, who are the best under 6s, who are the best under 7s, who are the best under 8s, who are the best under 9s, because and another side of that is you have to understand that those under 8s who are in the middle of that group of under 8s might be very good under 14s. So you have to know all the best players. So, and for me, it's important in the recruitment side, and especially in the scouting side, to know every player, know everything about them, where they play, school they go to, know the parents at least, and try and get them into your sessions to identify them, bring them in, and see if they're the type of player you want to bring into your academy. So
how did you become? You obviously start doing little bits and pieces, and you sort of progressed to quite a good big role at Arsenal. Tell us about that progression at the club.
It was just a progression. I didn't really realise it was happening, to be fair. So I worked in the academy, scouted players, coached, and just tried to bring the best players in that I saw as the best players. So literally we would know every player at every academy in London, and they're unsigned players. Let's invite them in. Let's invite them into training. Once they're in training, do they like what we're doing? Do they like what we're going to tell them? Do they like the coaches? Do they like the coaching program? And I think that's where the key is with players is, and this is one thing I've always felt very strongly about is we're always talking about players, but we're not talking about children. So for me, every one of those under 6s, under 7s, under 8s are still children. So it's knowing the child. So are they the right child for you? And it goes back to what we spoke about before. Are they learners? Are they ones that have got a desire to play, want to play football every day, want to go on and become the best they can on the football pitch and in training?
Because there was that going back to that documentary once again. There was that quote saying, someone said, you can't spot a player at 6 or 7 or 8. But I mean, obviously, that's not what you're trying to do, is it? What are you trying to do?
No, and that's the thing. When people say you can't spot a player 6, 7, 8, I agree. But all you're trying to identify is the best young player who can develop into an older player. So that's all you're doing. I agree. You can't spot a player under 6, under 7, or 8 think he's a professional footballer. No one can do that. And if they do, I've heard people say that. He's going to be a top player. He's going to be a top player. They say that, and they're probably not in their same job in 10, 15 years' time. So they can really say what they want as well, to an extent. Because I think that's what a lot of clubs do. They do sell players' dreams, and that's where the documentary did hit the spot a few times, where a lot of people are sold dreams that aren't realistic. And it goes back to what I was saying: when you do sign a player in the academy, that's the initial conversation. It's you're going to be released at some point. and you have to set that expectation.
There's one point in that, I don't want to talk about his documentary, that whole interview, but there's one point in that documentary where that boy who was at Darby got pulled out. But my issue was that obviously, you obviously know the background to that story as well, I'm not sure you do, it was the dad actually who was at, City, Madrid, Athletico rather, Darby, and Lambos. And why is such a young player being in so many clubs? And obviously, as you probably know, the background story was more of the dad was pulling him in and pulling him out. So just tell us a little bit about that, the parents and how important they are and how much of an impact they have, and are they a problem, and what's your relationship, what's your experience been with that sort of thing?
I always feel you, as well as recruiting the right child, the right player into academy, you have to recruit the right parent. Because an example is if a player's not going to get the boy to training, it's more than likely he's not going to develop as well as the other players in those groups. If the dad's gonna be create a high pressure environment at home for the child, it's a problem. Things are a problem. So you have to understand and try and recruit the parent as well to an extent, as well as the child to become that player you want him to become. Because to be fair to the academy system, and I think I've said this before, I think on Twitter, that coaches hate this if I say this, is coaches have minimal impact on players in the sense of they will develop them technically, tactically, but that's probably about 7 or 8% of their working of their week, of the child's week. The rest of it is spent at school with their parents. They're the ones really that are the bigger contributors to the child socially, psychologically, in those areas, in their learning, things like that. And I think that's other areas that need to be addressed more. And coaches have a massive impact, but it's not as much as they think. So when they deliver their sessions, it should really be, again, technique, tactically. Can you create a learner? Can you spark their learning? Things like that.
Interesting. So then tell us a little bit about then. I mean, you at Arsenal, you're working part time. You're still working in the city then at that time, were you? And then did you progress up to what was your?
So I just coached in West London.
And about what Arsenal? What role did you progress to
I took some under 9 sessions, under 10 sessions, and things like that. But I think in Arsenal at the time, there's only a level you can progress to.
But in terms of the scouting, so what you just like what was your title as a scout? Scout or
I think it was just regional scout at the time. It was just regional scout. So I looked after the scout for West London, up to foundation phase, ran a development centre.
So how many? To give an idea, how many hours a week are you doing in this role?
Oh, massively, and the first 2 years it was unpaid as well.
Right.
So to get a foot in the door in academy football, sometimes, and to get to a level, you have to do things unpaid, and it was voluntary. But my learning was massive. Right. So I spend, say, 2 evenings a week at the academy, 1 evening a week at the academy 2, 1 evening coaching at development centre, and then Saturday and Sunday watching games, youth games for foundation phase and pre-academy. Okay.
And then, so talk about your next project, Brentford. Tell us a little bit about that, how that came about.
Basically, Ozzy Banji and Sean O'Connor. Ozzy Banji went into Brentford as direct. I'd never met Ozzy. He'd worked at Watford. He knew of me. He contacted me and said he wanted to meet me. No idea why. He told me it was a club in West London. He was going as academy manager. He met me on the same day as Sean, so Sean went in there with him as well. The next day he met me and Dan Buck, both on the same day, different locations, and he convinced both of us to join the academy.
So what was he? What was the role then? Similar role, just part-time scout?
Yeah, it was part-time to be full-time. So within a year, I'd become full-time.
Right.
So that was the conversation we had. It came to a point where I was working in the city and I wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't something that drove me to enjoy what I was doing. It wasn't enjoyable work. So financially, it was obviously a lot better, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So worked in part-time. So I was with Sean as his assistant. Again, developed the academy. We had to start from scratch. The level of the players in the academy wasn't the level of. It was probably, looking back at it, out of centre of excellences, it was probably second from bottom, something like that. In no one knew who the academy was, and so immediately the task was, one, get players who are good enough to play academy football, not to improve what's there, but to play academy football. Improve the brand, make the club somewhere that parents would trust you with their children to develop. So the whole project was massive. What we had to do from scratch was massive. Recruit new staff, recruit new scouts, put in a scouting structure that fitted in to what Brentford needed as an academy. We're not going to compete with the Chelseas, the Arsenals. Again, reflecting back on what I did at Arsenal, we knew every player. We're not going to know every player in London as Brentford. One, they won't come to us. Two, they're too far. Lots of reasons why. So we have to identify players that would suit what we need to develop as an academy and fit into the model.
So talk a little bit about that contrast of being at Arsenal then going to Brentford.
Yeah.
What's that like in terms of, say, so you talked about different sorts of players. What sort of players are you looking at, and then how do you? We'll go into that in a minute. But how do you convince the player to come to Brentford rather than going to
the player? And it might sound really silly what I'm going to say, but the player we're looking at is exactly the same level as player as I would have done at Arsenal. The level would have been exactly the same, regardless it was at Brentford. And I'm not sure, a lot of people have seen that at Brentford, the players that come out of there now, once the academy closed, the players now, most at Cat 1 academies, top quarter of their groups, England youth internationals, Alfie Mawson, England 21. So that there's players in there that have developed and we're at the level of, that are at the level of the Champions League academies, the Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenhams. So the same player would recruit. We'd have to look at places from working at Arsenal. Okay, let me. And I reflected back and I thought, okay, would Arsenal see the as many middle of the groups, under 8s, for example? Another aspect was I put up a map of London and the southeast, and knew every scout in every region of the major clubs. We then graded those scouts at different levels. So if an area was too competitive or a scout was very good, you had a lot of time for respect for, and knew they worked really well, you wouldn't focus a lot of time, effort, energy, expenditure on that. You'd look at other areas where you thought, okay, this is a good area we can compete in. So identifying areas, development centres where clubs at development centres, what can we can compete there, we can be as competitive, then we can be as good as them in those areas.
So you're looking at basically weak links in the chains at other clubs?
100%. And I think a lot of people at clubs don't think that way.
Yeah.
You're looking at that, identify staff at other clubs as well. We try to identify a number of staff that would come in and help us and do what we're doing within there.
Tell us a bit more about that staff. What do you mean identify staff?
So in areas that we were weaker in, so for example working at Brentford, you've got the M4 corridor, M40 corridor, you've got the North Circular that comes in as well into there. So let's identify all the schools, all the clubs, all the leagues in an easy commutable distance from that. Let's not look at East London, for example, because East London is going to take you, it's quicker to get from Reading, which is 50 miles, whatever it is, than it is from East London if it's 10 or 11 miles for a parent. So what's the point of bringing a child in all the way from East London if his commute's going to be 2 hours, hour and a half, which you can't anyway, but if it's going to be an hour, hour and a half, whatever it is, within the time limit when you can bring a boy in for 40 minutes, he's going to have more time at home, he's going to have more time after school. If he's coming in from East London stressed, parents stressed, not going to eat properly, not going to study properly. So the holistic side of that, you have to take consideration into that as well.
And what about, did you identify other scouts you wanted from other clubs and go and tap them up?
No, not really. You identified them. Some wanted to come because the biggest problem was budget. The budget at Brentford was minimal compared to other clubs. So the only reason you could identify scouts, which is going back to the question you asked me initially, was you'd identify scouts who wanted to develop themselves.
Right.
So which scouts weren't getting their opportunities, other clubs, which scouts would come in and want to learn and want to develop themselves and would have, in a way, a fast track in their learning, in their responsibility, in what they could do, and you gave those people opportunities.
And so you moved up to head of recruitment to Brentford. Tell us a bit about that. Your role as head. What's your job in town? Also, I'm a little bit interested in your scout development. How do you teach scouts to see what to recognise?
Okay. So, I mean, once you start moving up to academy head of recruitment, you spend less time out on the grass, watching players out at grassroots, other academies. So that's one thing you do less of. You do more a lot of, as you say, the organisation side, development side. So for all the scouts that I had, I would try and speak to them once a week, at least, once every few days, at least. So the key scouts and their staff, they'd speak to them, they'd have an open, they can call me, anyone could speak to me any time of the day. The worst thing that I always found when I was a scout was people not returning calls. So senior people at clubs not returning calls, and you're trying to bring in players in that are good players, but they'll take 2, 3, 4 days to get back to you. So for me, it's always getting back to people, regardless of their level at football clubs, at your football club, because they're helping you, they're working for you.
And so I'm saying, for instance, I'm a new scout, I'm working for you. What's your bits of advice for me to go and find them those gems, those hidden gems?
Yeah. So what we initially did was we brought them in and started like a talent ID program where we would give them. It's like a mini project of watch 2 or 3 games of academy games, 2 or 3 academy sessions. Identify not the best players. We're not looking at identify the best ones with certain attributes. So an interesting one, which is identify the best technical players in that group. Identify those. My next stage of their progression is you've said he's the best technical player, but what does technique mean? Is ball striking? Is ball manipulation? Is short passing, long? Whatever it is, the technical detail is massive. The technical. So let's define that a little bit more, and again, you're helping them understand what players can do at younger ages, any age group, and areas their strengths and weaknesses. So they can go out when they're going back to report on the player, sending you back a report. They can give you the detail that you need to look at. And
just interesting that talking about those hidden gems. We've got a couple of questions. I'll do it now because before we move on to the first team thing, is a couple of questions for some of the listeners. Top 3 things he looks for in a player when he is watching a player for the first time.
Wow, that's an interesting one because it's not one you can really ask. I'm not going to swerve the question because I'll come back to it, but it all depends on the age group.
Right.
So in the younger age groups, it's all about again, what we said before, their learning, their desire, determination. Can they deal with the ball? Could they deal with the ball in the future? For example, if we put them into the programme, one thing I'd always say, their agility, younger age groups, going through the age groups, you'd start looking at youth development phase, their technical detail, is it good enough?
Right.
You're not going to get every player having a wide technical base. He might have a narrow technical base, for example, but he might be very efficient in the way he plays and effective in the way he plays. So you can't deselect a player because you feel he's not technically excellent, for example, technically very good, because he may not need to be technically very good. Because I look at first, and this is sort of reflecting, going on the move to the next stage of that question in the first team, is not every first team player in the Premier League or in Champions League is 2-footed. So, and I have a real thing about when I'm watching sessions and looking at players and scouts saying, he's not good enough, he's technically not good enough, he can't use his left side. Okay, that's fine. What can he do on his right? Does that compensate? Is he good enough technically on his right side to play? Which is an interesting way. But yeah, it's got to be, can he affect a football match more than anything? That's the most important one. Can he affect a football match? Do you feel he can affect a football match in the future? Because sort of going back to what we're saying about underrated, so they're going to become a professional footballer, we don't know, but have they got something there? Be it their intelligence, the technical, physical, whatever it is, can affect football matches? Is it something you can work with and develop for the future? As you get older again, can affect football matches? Then again, you will have players who are a little bit functional in the way they play. We respect someone like Ryan Mason when he came through the counter system, deals the ball really well. Does he really affect games now, or when he did in first team football as much? Keeps the ball for fun, but is he a player that's really going to break lines with his passing every time, kind of thing? So as players get older, you're always looking at different parts of the game. Do they fit into the programme more than anything?
Another question here, I think you've answered a little bit, but we'll just go over anyway. What emphasis do they put on character, social cycle, corners or personality traits? I think you've gone over that, and how is this reported, identified?
It's an interest. It's one that I'm getting my head around at the moment. So scouts will go and watch one game, 2 games, 3 games, report on the player. It's interesting how and that may be in a 3-week period or a month period. So we're judging a child, for example, in academy football, on a month of his life. In those social, psychological, mental, he may be at a stage in development where he's not really developed that part. So he may develop later. So for me, it's a really big one. Even when you look at first team football now, I go to watch a game in France, Germany, Spain, and I'm looking at a player in one game. That's one sample of that player, and all I'm taking away is one sample. You have to look at the broader picture of that. You have to look at him across a number of games, clips from a number of games. So whenever in first team football, you look at him in different scenarios. You look at him when they're winning the game 2-0, when they're losing the game 2-0, when it's 88 minutes and it's 2-1, they're losing 2-1, or it's 88 minutes and they're winning 2-1. So you have to look at him in as many different environments as possible. With younger players, again, bring him into different environments. When you bring him on trial, when you're watching them on grassroots, try and look at him in different environments, in good weather, bad weather. Sometimes you haven't got the time to do that, but I think it's important, if you can, to try and do that, because all a scout does is taking a snapshot of that game he's watched, but really you should be taking a snapshot of a longer period.
I assume it's like, I don't know. I mean, I assume it's easier at a younger age to make a snapshot rather as they get up the tree, and then now in your first team role, I suppose the implications of it are a much bit greater, right?
Yeah. So it's easier to watch a player in the first team a number of times because of the systems and the IT infrastructure you've got around you to be able to watch on video whatever game.
But what I mean, it must be, I don't know, but it's like, as an 8-year-old, say it's nice, because obviously I come across the players and I have relationships with clubs. It's a lot easier for me to make a decision on an 8-year-old than a 14, 15-year-old.
Oh, definitely.
Because you can see he moves really well. That's potential. Whereas a 14, 15-year-old, it's like, well, there's a lot more variables in effect, right?
I agree. However, one of the things I did, which in academy football, was if I've got that boy on trial or is a boy I'm monitoring, I'm not going to watch him just as grassroots. I'm watching him play through school.
Yeah.
A different environment.
Yeah.
He's probably going to be the best player. What his behaviour is, it's not his behaviour as in good or bad, but it's tactical behaviour. Does he hold on the ball a lot more because he's the best player?
Yeah.
Is he a player, a team player? So you have to watch them in, sort of saying the snapshots you have to watch them in are different snapshots. Yeah. And I think it's extremely important. It's one of the things we did at Brentford, which worked really well, but people didn't really understand what we were doing. So at Brentford, we would take players to go to play outside London, to Birmingham, Leicester, wherever it was, 2-hour coach journeys. People used to think, well, why are you taking under 7s, under 8s on 2-hour coach journeys to play 60 minutes of football? Actually, what we're doing is we're spending 2 hours on a coach with the children, getting to know what he does when he's in spare time, what he's doing with his teammates, what he eats. Yeah. Spending some time with them sitting at the back of the coach, or we're sitting next to them on the coach as staff. What they like, what they do, what time they went to bed. You find out so much information there. Part of that as well, we did it with combined age groups. So people talk a lot about biobanding and it's always on the pitch. But actually, why can't you do biobanding off the pitch? So on the coach with players, with the under 7s, with the under 9s, for example. Yeah. So a lot of that, you can stretch the players a lot more and get their learning accelerated.
Interesting. How much use of data is used? Examples of types considered. How important is data now in your scouting? In
first team or academy recruitment?
Well, in all. I mean, it was quite interesting just because obviously, and also let's answer this, and then I want your thoughts on how the FA have changed their recruit model now, haven't they? And they've gone to more data driven and just released a lot of scouts.
I don't actually know what went on. I know the staff that left at the FA. I don't know what they're putting into place in the FA. So I can't really comment on the data. My background is an analytical background, so I understand the data, I understand the purpose of it, I understand people will talk about assists, but then I think this goes a little bit further, because if you're looking at goals, passes completed, things like that, that's just really a statistic. What the FA are probably trying to do is the analysis, so combining a number of stats to build up an analysis of information. So that's the analytical part, so it's not really stats. A couple of things I've done in academy football, for example, is I did a little project for myself, a little research project, where I want us to know every player in our academy who received the ball with his non-dominant foot and received the ball with his dominant foot. So by doing that, the video analysts, as the code in each game, that's the information's already, you just have to drag it out of the system. So by that, we identified lots of players who were always receiving on their dominant foot to make the pass on their dominant foot. So there's a lot of players you identify there by, let's try and get them to receive on a non-dominant to play with a dominant to open up space, to improve their touch. So I believe a lot in using the data in the right way, in the right context. So I use data from my first team's recruitment as well in the scouting to identify players with, for example, if I'm looking at a defensive midfielder, let me find a defensive midfielder who's got a lot of recoveries, who makes recoveries and tackles a different thing, so a lot of recoveries, tackles, he makes a pass, and that pass, for example, leads to a passing chain of 3 or 4 passes, because if it's a bad pass and if it's a chain of 2 passes, more than likely that first pass isn't a great pass. So for me, data is essential.
Essential now, I suppose, like obviously, well, I assume in first team it's a lot more prevalent because you have the environment.
The resources there.
How could you use the data more? Say you have a trialist coming, he's on a 6-week trialist, which you happen in the Premier League, get a 6-week trial. How could you use data to make a decision, or is it always just going to be right?
I don't think you can.
I fancy him, I don't fancy him.
I don't think you can make on a technical part. I don't think you can, because if we look at a football match, on the ball, a player is approximately, I think it's like 1.1% of the time on the ball. So the technical piece, I don't think you can. The physical parameters, the physical testing, I believe it gives you an indication. So if you've got a player that comes in and his physical stats, and I'm not talking about speed, power, endurance, I'm looking at agility, and areas like that, it's 10-metre sprints, any tests you want to do, and if they're on par with an academy player, bang, straight of interest. If it's too low, okay, he's not been in the academy system, so we can't really judge him. But I think you can use it in a positive way. If you lose it in a negative way, I think you'll probably make a mistake, because if you're bringing a boy in at 14 from grassroots and he's not got the same physical stats as an academy player, of course he hasn't trained for 3 times a week for the last 5 years. So I think you just have to use the context of it very carefully.
Okay, so because we're running out of time here, so I want to get on to now your first team experience. How did your first role at Fulham, how did that come about? And what was that?
It was actually, I started working first team at Brentford. So who
was the manager at the time?
So it's Mark Wolverhampton.
Obviously Mark's got a bit of a history in the city as well. Was that some sort of, did you have some?
No, so it was Frank McParland, so he was sporting director at the time. And just got to know him, and he trusted me in going to do some first team reports, scouting for him, and ended up just bringing him into first team because of that. I wrote lots of reports, a few reports for him, went to watch a few players. I guess it's when you have opportunities like, you have to make the most of it, and what you produce has to be of good quality. So in those reports, you write the detail that you see, the detail that you think the player can become. So for example, for a centre-half, extremely important for a centre-half to be able to adjust his feet quickly off the ball. Can he adjust his feet to turn in and out if the ball slides in either side of him? So you need a lot of detail in there.
What was a major difference though between when you got into first team and then the difference between working first team and academy? What was a major differences?
You look a lot less at potential,
right?
Because any first team manager in the Premier League, in the Championship, any league, and I'm generalising it, but 99% of them want a player for them now. They're not going to really want a player to develop for the next manager. It's very rarely you get that. But yeah, they're going to want a player for you now. I mean, if I send them a player, if I speak to a manager, he's a top player, he's going to be really, in 2 or 3 years' time, he'll be excellent. He's going to say, no, but I need to get promoted this year, I need to win the league this year. I need the player right now. So that's the biggest one for me. and for me that's an easy one. I'll just store that player. I'll just have all my notes, all my information. I'll have it all recorded in my head on whatever, on my laptop, whatever it is in my database.
So have you still got a map on your wall, but this time
no, it's a different. It's a different. Yeah, you have that
got
because
every player in the world.
No, I've got different team sheets in different formations of different players who are under whatever age it is. Youth players, 21s, players that are going to be over 26, players that are going to be free transfer in a year's time, anything like that. So I've got all stuff like that recorded, which I need to. It's basically that information I'm using for the future as long as 6 months, a year's time for transfer windows.
So tell us a bit about Fulham then. How did that come about? You moved across West London to...
So Mike Grigg came in there and he offered me a role there to be work for him as European scout. Works for him, he's very, very good at his job, very super organised. Learned a lot from him in the organisation and how to build, because he had to build a department, and how to build a recruitment scouting department across Europe, how to manage that, how to transfer that information to a manager.
It's quite interesting though, because you've gone into a club like Brentford and you've built a scouting network over, West London, or for instance that part, and then they've gone in and seen a world almost, an international. Yeah. What's the difference between that, and how in terms of how you relate to your scouts and how the information comes in? What's the major differences?
I think the information that comes in from scouts is exactly the same. The technical detail's different. It's less about what you think they can do in the future. That is important, but that's less a priority. It's what they can do, how they play. For example, centre forward. For example, going back a little because I don't want to comment on any players now, but someone like Thierry Henry, a lot of his finishes came in off the left side, right side. So identify players who have got certain attributes that your manager wants. So your manager I want a forward, but defaults more to the left side because I've already got someone coming in from the right side, kind of thing. So you're dealing a lot more specifics, and the parameters are already there set for you, kind of thing. So you go and identify players with those attributes, which goes back to maybe, can I use the data to identify that? Do I have to watch hundreds of games to watch that, to identify players like that? So scout reports, whatever it is.
So in terms of how you work now, as obviously now you're at Wolves or when you're at Fulham or Brentford, so how do you work? Say the manager says, look, we need a new fullback, for instance. Yep. We want him this qualities, we want him to be certain height or this or that, or does it more like you're saying, look, I found also, but I've got a left back, or do you still say, look, I've got this hidden gem, I found this player here.
Yeah, I'll always do that. For example, the manager might say to me, we need a new left back next season. So my first comment would be, is he short base? Do you want a short base or long base? Do you want him technically good, or do you want him to be someone physically good who can work the length of the channel? Do you want to play inside or outside of the channel? All the detail. I know it's not technique, but the technical detail, you want, you have to establish. If you don't ask, you're going to bring him X when he wants Y, kind of thing. Yeah. So you always need to be specific in the type of player that he wants, because you don't want to bring him something he doesn't need. A young player, gem, of course, because the budget for this transfer window might be 10 million. He might be spending 9 million on a centre forward, and you've only got $1 million left, and all you can afford is that gem. So you have to have different players. And as I'm saying about, I've got different lists of players of different types of value, experience, age, that fit into different categories. Because the last thing you want, and I see it at a lot of clubs at the moment, is in transfer windows they make their decisions late, and those decisions are usually made because they're all the list they have. Their lists are probably quite small. Yeah. So the more options and recommendations you can have is essential.
And then talk a bit about the lifestyle. What's the difference between your lifestyle working as a first team scout and what it was like working in the academy?
Yeah, I think I probably worked a lot more hours as working in the academy. One, because it was a new project as well, but also academy football is in the evenings, so training's in the evenings and Sundays, games, training Saturdays. So a lot of my time was spent with that. At the moment, in first team football, I do the European scouting. So with that, I'll spend 2 or 3 days abroad. So for example, this weekend I was away in Spain. I picked up a Segunda game on Saturday. picked up in 2 games on Sunday and picked up a under 19s game in between that as well. So your lifestyle changes. I'm at home in the evenings, which suits my lifestyle to an extent, but the volume of work is different in the sense of I do my work when I'm away. So it sounds really glamorous going away travelling, but I don't have much time to myself because I'll be doing my scout reports, meeting agents, meeting contacts on players and speaking to people about players, watching them train, watching under 19s for players that may be on my radar in a year's time or 2 years' time.
So Scott, I mean, talk about glamorous. I mean, people often, associate that with academy football as well,
Yeah.
glamour. We know we've worked in it. Just tell us, what's the reality of working full time or even part time in academy football?
Academy football it's relentless. If it can be relentless in the amount of hours you put in, because I could potentially, at my time in academy football, I could have worked from 8 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night in the academy. I would have had something to do. And now I still have a lot to do, but I can manage my time a lot better. Which again, now I've got twins aged 3 and I've got another child on the way, but things like that suit me at the moment. So I would never say I wouldn't go back into academy football because I really enjoyed my time on academy football, but the only reason I would go back is to make a difference.
But I mean, so why do you think the culture is like that though in academy football? Why do you think it is so extreme where it is, the hours, you're working 6 or 7 days a week, 10, 12-hour days, these are not unusual things, but that's across the board, that's every club. Why do you think that is the culture? And then at first team maybe it becomes a little bit different.
I don't know, I mean, I'm going back to the Barcelona, and from my experience, when I went to speak to an under-9s coach and when I went to speak to an under-19s coach, I'd get the same time. If I went to a club now and went to speak to an under-9s coach and speak to the under-18s coach, 23s coach, I wouldn't get the same attention time. And I think a lot of it is the culture, the massive culture, in the sense of not all the best coaches are under 9, under 10, and in a lot of countries, a lot of places abroad, it doesn't matter what age group you're working with, you still have to be the best kind of thing. So, in academy football, I watch some under 9s and the 10s, and they're not always the best coaches at the club, and it's rare to see top coaches working with the underage groups, and they're going to cost money. So I think it all comes down to cost and budgets.
Do you think that Barcelona maybe invest a little bit more in the coaches in terms of the budget and stuff?
And I feel clubs could invest a lot more in the coaches, and I feel in the education, because coaching badges are so expensive, and that's a massive one as well to get your A license. I saw a job I think advertised the other day. It was for an A license coach, and I think they're offering £20,000, and I've no idea what an A licence costs, but it's not going to be cheaper than £5,000-6,000. I'm not too sure the exact cost of it.
And you're a man of the world in terms of you've been to Barcelona. What's your thoughts on what we could improve in England? First of all, the education programmes the FA deliver and stuff like that.
The first thing I'll start with going upwards is grassroots, because a lot of people will say there's too many players playing in academy football with birthdays September to December. They're the players that come from grassroots football. That's because coaches and grassroots are playing the older ones, the ones that for them are the better players. That's one for me to improve. So I think education from the FA downwards into grassroots, and I don't think what they've tried to do in the last 18 months, 2 years, really changed very much. Changing to 5-side football to 5s, it's less players will get game time on the pitch. Before it was 7-a-side. More players will play. They might not get as many touches, but more players will be active, more players will be playing. So I think getting that in place, getting more players touching the ball, playing games, delivery of courses, I find, and I've always thought this about the FA coaching courses. I've done the talent ID courses. I've done my level 4 talent ID, and that compared to the coaching courses were more driving tests. So if you do things the right way and you deliver exactly what the tutor wants, you pass your course. It's not about development or looking ahead and how players improve. It's literally 8v8s, whatever it is, 6v6s, technical practices, not drills anymore, practices, and passing those. But really, it should be And going back to someone like Chris Ramsey, I've watched some of his sessions, and he can put on a session about cones, for example. They're the things that coaches need to be creative and be. That's how they develop, because I see a lot of coaches posting a lot on blogs and on Twitter of sessions, and people copying. That's a good session, but yeah, that's a good session for his players. But will that be a good session for the players that you have got that you're coaching? Is that what your player needs? So I think you start from zero from your sessions, and you develop sessions that suit your players all the time. And I think the education part of the coach, of him being creative, I think is lost. I don't think enough coaches can put on a session without cones, without bibs, and with 3 footballs, for example. I don't think many coaches can do that.
Okay, just finally then, what bit of advice would you have for a young scout who wants to get into talent recruitment, wants to be a full-time scout, travelling around the world, watching games? What bit of advice would you give?
Work hard. I think that's the biggest thing I can say to anyone.
When you started off working for free, do you think that's a big important thing?
Massive, and it suited me at the time. I could do it. It won't suit everyone, but I think it's important that you invest. And for me, I didn't mind that, because I was learning all the time. It was an environment that I could learn from Sean, from Roy Massey. I could learn from them.
Do you think that's then having a mentor is really important then?
Yeah, having people around you that you can learn from. And even if you don't have people around you, go and watch sessions, go and ask questions, the right questions. And that's one thing I found in football. You have to ask questions, but you have to ask questions in the right way and at the right time. I've worked for managers that you can't speak to them unless you call them at 6 o'clock at night or we meet for a coffee after training, because all he's focused on is that training session for that day, how he's planning his team for the weekend. You have to get people in football at the right time, I think, and invest in yourself is massive. Learn as much as you can, watch as many games as possible, watch as many sessions as possible. I watch sessions all the time, and even with if I'm walking my children in the park, wherever I see a game of football, I watch it, not to watch players, but just to watch or a session and things like that. What's the coach trying to do? What's things like that, and asking yourself questions and developing yourself more than anything.
Miguel Rios, thanks very much.
Thank you very much for having me on here. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.